Greetings from Montreal. My name's Taylor. I'd like to give a thank you for Q and Lisa and all the gang over at GroupLink for having us today. Always a pleasure. And, of course, we spend a lot of time together traveling around, GuavaCon, BrainShare, and so on. Hopefully, looking forward to seeing everybody there. Thanks for your time today. I know everybody's busy, and we bit off quite a bit for this presentation. We have a lot to cover, covering both retain and reload here. And really, for anyone who's familiar with retain, for GroupWise, retain in general with what we're doing with the product, and reload, it's going to be something where we'll kind of do a high-level overview just because of the time factor, and then, of course, we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. I'm going to cover both retain and reload here first, and then we'll leave maybe 5-10 minutes at the end so we can queue up those questions, I guess, in the chat window. And then, of course, anything offline or additional for your own individual environments, you can always contact me via email, tc@guava.com. Always welcome for product feedback, questions, concerns, and otherwise. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. We're going to start with retain first. So really a lot has happened here in the last 3-4 years since we've really been going heavy into the archiving space. It's really been an interesting time, and retain has really come a long way. And we've spent a lot of time, of course, looking at our competitors and what other products are out there. And, we think we've really, found our place in the market. More so when it comes to not just the technology, but, playing to your strengths and knowing what your product does, and, without getting into all the cliches, but, what pains you solve and what problems you're solving for your customers. And we really like to focus on making things simple, having all of the tools that you need in one product without having additional modules, making it extremely easy to use, extremely flexible on the deployment phase, and then backing it up with great service and support. And we think we've come a long way. Of course, you're never happy. There's always a lot to do with these products, and we will continue to have an extremely aggressive schedule here coming out in the next 6 to 12 months and beyond, and then we'll talk a little bit about futures maybe a little bit later. And the way we talk about our archiving solutions and the way that we talk about how they're used these days is maybe a little bit different than it was 4 years ago when we first started going heavy into archiving. And I kind of liken it to, what I always talk about is when we look at the anti-spam, antivirus, secure gateway technology market and so on, really different today than it was 10 years ago when this was really, heating up, maybe even a little bit more than 10 years ago, where we spent a lot of time educating and things were new, and, people would come to us to, for advice and just to maybe better understand what's going on out there. And I think that these days, most people know why you need to archive. In some cases, you really don't have a choice. It's either a regulatory type of compliance type deal or best practices. Everyone has their own reasons, but it's the type of thing where these days most people have a really good idea of why they need to do these things, and then it comes down to, wading through all of the different products. Everyone does things maybe a little bit differently. It's not just about price. I mean, there's a lot of differences in competitive pricing. There's differences in storage models. There's differences in, architecture, and just so many different things. So it really depends on what's important to you in your organization. What are you trying to do? Is it for compliance? Is it just to get everything off of your GroupWise system? And are you also planning for the future? And what are the impacts on your end users and financially for your company? Not just on implementing a new technology, but what are the liabilities in the event of an investigation or whatever the case may be. So really, a lot of this stuff is not just about I always say it's not about scaring people into buying software. It really depends on what your needs are. So in a nutshell, we give you the ability to store 100% of your email, make it discoverable, make it portable, and then within that we just try and make it extremely simple, flexible in terms of the design, the architecture, and then behind that we try and have just fantastic support and service. So that's really what we're trying to do these days. So as we go through the product, I'll just kind of be relating more than anything what's been happening for the last 3 or 4 years and how we see the market and the technology and what people are asking for. and then where's it going into the future. So we're going to start with retain, so this is the archiving solution, and then we're going to follow that up with reload. And what we're going to find is that they're really, really similar in terms of what they do. They store 100% of your email. GroupWise is just so excellent when it comes to giving you these anti-deletion type of technologies that are not available in other messaging platforms. So we really have some great luxuries with this messaging platform, and it's really something that as we, Guava as a company, support other messaging systems these days fine, you really notice the differences. So we're pretty spoiled in the GroupWise world. A lot of these things just work really nicely and really seamlessly, and it's really just it's night and day when it comes to archiving in GroupWise and then the differences between other messaging platforms. And that goes beyond email as we look at doing stuff with mobility type of messages and moving forward into other types of collaborative technologies, and we'll talk about that maybe at the end of the retain session. So, these days, why do we see people archiving their mail? They're eliminating the headaches with personal archives. That is really a big, big problem for a lot of organizations. Imagine a 10,000-user shop with 10,000 personal archives on 10,000 workstations. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare to manage. You need to centralize your archives. You need to make sure that you have everything where you need it so you can speed up that discovery process. It's kind of going to, tie into the reload discussion where we talk about, getting into your backups in the event of a disaster. It's kind of the same thing. The time and the energy and the resources associated with going back and looking through or finding what you need, in a lot of cases, justifies having this type of technology in the first place. So, outside of the compliance angle and basically being mandated to do this type of stuff, it really varies depending on where you are in the world. So we know within North America, it's heavily regulated. We have a litigation type of atmosphere. Maybe not so much up here in Canada. So, for us up in Montreal here, you don't see it too much when it comes to, policy-based archiving and so on. We have a couple of bills going through Parliament, but it's certainly nothing like all of the SEC regulations, HIPAA, Freedom of Information requests, sunshine laws. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So really also a big difference between what we see in North America and Europe, for example, where it comes down to the right of privacy for end users, regardless of the vertical or the industry. So we definitely see some interesting trends across the planet. In general, keeping your messaging system running in a good, lean, manageable size, knowing fully well that you've got 100% of the data available, whether it's in your backup system or it's in your archive, and then having the tools, of course, to access it is key. So, one of the really nice benefits that we've noticed here in the last 3 to 4 years by putting everything into a long-term permanent storage server and making it accessible, based on your role or your responsibility within the organization, is the ability to reduce those backup times. I mean, that's really sweet. If you can run your reduces and expires and get your GroupWise system down to a nice manageable size, well, that's going to make your backup window smaller. You're going to, spend less money on your backup tapes. It's going to take less time, depending on what technology you're using. And if you need to restore something from your backups, well, then that's also going to be, a nice, a smaller time frame and require less human resources because it's less data. And, of course, migrations. And this is migrations, not away to a different messaging platform, but migrations to, netware to Linux or netware to Windows, depending on what you're doing these days. So, these things all kind of tie together. So you do get some additional benefits. Outside of getting into the negative or the downside of not having this data available, of course, there's many different things that can happen if you don't have access to this stuff. So I think it's relatively I'll say obvious, but outside of investigations, HR type of requests, if you do have to produce material in a timely manner for any type of a court case, and beyond that, if we look at even little things like here at Guava, we're a software company, and to us, deadlines and timelines and delivery dates and so on are all opportunities that we want to capitalize on, just like any organization. And when you can't access information that's vital to your organization, maybe you're going to miss some opportunities, and that can equal, in a lot of cases, lost revenue, which is obviously something that most companies are in business to generate. So, without getting too much into the downside of not having the stuff, I think we all kind of understand, the reasons why. But there's definitely some additional benefits that you get when it comes to the backup, restore, migration times, and making sure that your system is running in a nice, lean, manageable size and that end-user performance and end-user experience is the best that it can be. Moving on to point number 2 here, and we'll take a look at the demo servers at some point too. I don't want to just kill everybody with slides here, but it's nice just to have something to follow along with. And then anytime you want these slides, of course, you can just get in touch with me and we can send those out. I think this whole thing will get recorded as well, so that will also be available. So storing, managing, and discovering your email. It sounds pretty simple, and we think that it is. So keeping all of the tools to manage your policies. Making the policy creation extremely simple. I mean, that's what we've seen from some other solutions out there, is that they're extremely complex. Forget about the cost. We know that Retain is extremely competitive on price. But when we look at complexity, this is probably the biggest thing that we hear in terms of feedback from other archiving solutions that switch over to Guava, is that the complexity to manage the policies, to deploy the policies, to update policies, to have different policies for different people, different post offices, different distribution lists, depending on how you organize this stuff, is difficult, it's time-consuming, it's complex. So, it's really just a matter of having all these tools in one place so that you can, store your mail, search it, and do the discovery process, make it portable. You don't need additional tools, and then you can reduce the cost of deploying these things. And the complexity is really the biggest thing. I mean, who's got time to sit down and read a 200-page manual these days? Not many people. So you have to make it simple, and you have to make it flexible. So that's really what's going on here. Search tools integrated into the product. So the e-discovery piece is integrated into Retain. Once again, depending on your role and your responsibility within the organization, it's going to determine what you can see and what you can do in the system. So that, I think, is pretty straightforward. But the one thing we try and achieve here is to make sure that the end user experience is as good as it can be. So the web interface here is very similar to the GroupWise web access interface. So it's really not that difficult to find your way around in Retain, performing basic searches, performing advanced searches. And then, what we do is we create some tools for our customers, whether they're slide decks, whether it's little 3 to 5 minute videos that you can post on your intranet, or however you handle your training at your respective organization. These things are important to get these out and do the training. Make sure that the end users understand how these things are working, and then in the end, it's something that you can roll out, if you choose to do that without this burden of complexity. Single instance storage, so this one is always going to come up, and it's always going to be a really interesting conversation for us. What we see is some great differences between GroupWise and other messaging platforms. The single instance storage, this compression model that we have in GroupWise, man, it's really great. It's really great. It makes it really easy. A lot easier anyways to kind of predict how much storage you're going to need into the future. It's really different in other messaging systems where some don't even have single instance storage for other reasons, and it's maybe a bigger story. But the one thing that we can try and do here is to keep the cost of storage low. There's a lot of groups out there that will tell you that storage is cheap. Well, from my experience with thousands of Guava customers, yeah, sure, maybe storage is cheap for going out and buying a 1 or a 2 terabyte drive at home, but a lot of times enterprise storage is not so cheap. And people these days especially are not just going out and spending money like crazy anyway. So to add 1, 2, 5, 10 terabytes of storage is significant. So yeah, maybe it's come down in price, sure, but that's money that you cannot escape the cost of storage. So, if you can keep your storage model as lean as possible, well, obviously you're going to recognize the benefits of that, especially into the future. That's really where we can't, we can't stress it enough when it comes to 5, 7, 10 years down the road. Well, in a non-single instance storage model, you're talking about massive amounts of storage over time. So that's what we're trying to do. That is across at this point, Retain supports both GroupWise and Exchange. So the storage model is single instance across all systems. Where we see even greater savings on disk or in storage is in a multiple post office environment where Typically in, say, a 5 PO environment, for example, we send an email out to everybody in the company. Well, we know it. GroupWise does this store and forward type of technology. The message, the attachment gets stored once, and then the pointer goes out to the mailbox. Well, if it goes to all 5 POs, it's going to be stored once per post office, and then the pointer's out to the individual mailboxes. So with Retain, we do the single instancing across the entire system. So what that means is if something goes out to 100 users in 5 post offices, instead of storing it 5 times, we store it once, and then we put the pointers to the POs, and then the pointers again out to the end user, so that we're keeping that storage model even leaner in a multiple post office environment. So if you've got 1 terabyte on disk, it's going to be 1 terabyte or less in Retain, and then we can plan out the averages moving forward by doing the deduplication and keeping the cost of storage down. Once you get in there, you're storing your mail, you're using the discovery tools, and you need to make these email messages portable. We have a very quick and lean PDF export. We use an encrypted database for our publishing client, and then additionally we have some exporting options from that publishing client, PST, PDF, and encrypted database. So those are all options, and it really depends on what your needs are. What are your discovery processes? Is it just a FOIA type of request where you just need to grab 20 emails and export them off and hand them off to somebody, or do you need to go in and look at all the email between two individuals within a certain time period and then hand that off with a viewer and a redaction type of technology that you can give to, say, a lawyer or your HR staff or whoever. So we'll take a look at that as well here as we move along. Okay, so I'll go a little faster here as we get into the technology and just kind of go through some of these things. Technology that we use, of course, we always have choices here. So we went with SOAP. That was somewhat new, obviously, in GroupWise 7, and these days with GroupWise 8.02. And the service packs and the hot patches, fantastic technology, really performant. We've seen just great speed and performance out of Retain. So SOAP to the POs, and then we use the trusted application key to get in and out of the end users' mailboxes. We integrate, of course, with the GroupWise Smart Purge and Retention flags. These are technologies that are native to Novell, to the GroupWise system. You have a purge flag, you have a retention flag, and those are specifically for backup and archiving technologies, not just Guava. Any company can integrate with these, any third-party ISV. And, of course, what these are anti-deletion type of technologies where if you have a situation where you want to capture 100% of the email, well, then you most definitely want to use these technologies. We're really spoiled, once again, in the GroupWise world that we have these technologies. These Smart Purge type of anti-deletion technologies simply do not exist in other messaging platforms. So really makes it easy for us. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to the architecture now. So when we talk about operating systems and databases and storage models, well, this ties into how we, collect email and how we store it. So for the Retain, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Should we be seeing advancing slides on this?
Absolutely.
Okay. I think there may be.
What do you see right now?
Right now we see SOAP and trusted application.
Yes.
Is that the correct slide?
It is.
Okay. Perfect. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, not at all. No, thank you for checking because. No, I mean, if nothing's working, then obviously that's not going to make a whole lot of sense to anybody. If anything seems like it's not moving, and you know what I'll do there, Lisa, is I'll say when I switch the slide, and that way if you notice that it doesn't go, just let me know again.
All right, thank you.
Cool, thanks. Okay, so platforms we support, so Linux, Windows, you're going to see great performance, regardless of whether or not you're on Linux or Windows. When we move forward to the database, MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, Postgres, Oracle, you've got some open source technologies there. You've got some, obviously, enterprise technologies there. So you definitely have a choice. The one thing I'll stress with all of these, so with MySQL, Microsoft, Hitachi, EMC, and Amazon, and so on, we have partnered with all these companies so that we put all of these integrations through our QA processes. So we don't just say we integrate with these products, we just take data from Retain and we punt it off to some other storage vendor. No, we don't do that. We've tested all of these. We've gone through all of the QA processes. We've, integrated with our APIs to make sure that everything is working as designed and as expected. These will maybe make a little bit more sense when we jump to the next slide and look at the architecture. Speed and performance in our largest, multiple tens of thousands of end users, multiple dozens of post offices, terabytes of data. We're seeing performance around 1 million messages a day, even better than that in some cases. So super fast. We know that Retain is pretty much destroying the competition when it comes to speed and performance. That's just something that we see from our customers and our benchmarks and people that we've converted from other systems over to Retain. The single instance storage, we talked about that, and then the compression and encryption. Compression is automatic, encryption is optional. Okay, we're switching slides. So now we should be on the architecture slide, and I think that should be okay. So really what we're looking at is the little diagram down at the bottom. Really simple. So when we talked about the architecture, there's really three pieces. There's the Retain server, the Retain worker, and your SQL database. So how these things kind of tie together, the Retain worker is just a little software component that can either go on your GroupWise system, on your post office server, or it can go on the Retain server, or it can go on any server. Really depends. If you're going to let us put it on the post office, then we're going to get great performance. If we want to put it on the Retain server because we can't put anything on the post office, you're still going to get great performance, but of course we have to do that extra hop from Retain over to the PO and then back again. But in some cases, of course, we can't put anything on the post office. Retain worker is really just a software piece. It does that SOAP connection. It enforces your policy, collects the data, sends it to the Retain server. The Retain server is where we're serving up the UI. The web servers there, obviously, it's where you're creating your policies. It is where you're setting up your storage, and your storage is going to be either physical spinning disks, your SAN, all of those third-party storage devices that we partner with, the Amazon cloud if you want to go that way, and then the SQL database, so that this kind of ties into the storage model, is where we're going to keep all the metadata, all the routing information, all the information about the messages, as well as any internal configurations or potentially offline passwords, things like that. So the Retain server is going to be pretty much 100% your storage, and then the SQL database is going to represent maybe 5, 7, 10%, depending on how much mail you have in there. It's going to be roughly maybe 7% around that mark of the overall size of your archive. So that's the architecture. So really straightforward, three pieces, and we're now changing slides again. Okay, so these are kind of best practices when we look at the deployment type of scenarios. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. It's just the things that we've learned in the last several years of going through multiple projects. Pick your technology. The nice thing that we try and do here is go with whatever you're most comfortable with. If you're comfortable with Windows, use Windows. If you're comfortable with Linux, use Linux. If you have GroupWise running on NetWare, we can still support that. No worries. Point number 2, the first thing you do is your data collection. You're doing 100% of your post offices. You have 5 post offices. They're 200 gigs each. Well, that first job that we do is we're going to get 100% of your data into Retain, and then moving forward, we're going to use those catch-up type of jobs. Typically you're going to run those every night, but there are some different scenarios where you do those in different types of intervals. And then in conjunction with those smart purge flags, so the retention flag or the purge flag, well, we're just going to catch up from where we left off so that we don't have to rescan the entire post office, and we're not going back and redredging the entire mailbox. We're just catching up. The purge flag and the retention flag are basically date and time stamps on each individual mailbox so that we know how far back to go instead of rescanning everything. And then point 3 here, I'll just quickly touch on it, but it's definitely, in some cases, just a massive project. These personal archives that are out there, whether they're on a workstation or a network drive, it's a beast. I mean, we've got some cases with thousands and thousands of users that you want to, ingest all of these archives into the centralized archive. It can be a real time-consuming process. So that's something that, just to set expectations in line with what it's going to be, getting those personal archives in there. We have a utility for it. We've got something for workstations, something for the network drives, and it can definitely be done, but it's definitely as big a project as getting the system up and running. Okay, so now we should be on the tip slide. We've moved ahead one more. And this is just kind of some best practices here. Keep up your regular maintenance on GroupWise. We run into a lot of shops that don't do regular maintenance on GroupWise, and the corruption and missing message parts and missing attachments and so on is evident. So make sure you're running your regular maintenance. Run your GW checks. Run your fixes and repairs. It's really important. decide what you want to put into the archive. It's really easy to get stuff into the archive. You have tons of options in terms of filtering what goes into the archive, but the deletion type of policies are maybe not as flexible as the archiving option. So, it's really, really good to have your policy in place before. We do run into some people from time to time that just put everything into the archive, and then afterwards they want to kind of weed some things out when it's really easier to filter it before you put it in versus trying to weed messages out afterwards. Your storage considerations, of course, lots of choices there. You can have your server components or your servers all over the place depending on your organization and your, where your offices are and where your post offices are and so on. We do have an integration here with Reload. So Reload is what we're going to be moving to here in maybe 4 or 5 minutes. So you do have the ability to archive off of the Reload backup server. So that's maybe something I'll touch on a little bit more in the Reload presentation, but we do have some cases where we don't just say do it. We say, do it when you have to do it. And those types of scenarios are when you have poor bandwidth between offices and you want to make sure that you're, able to reach out and grab these, grab these backups first because the Reload backups are very tiny, and then we can turn around and archive off of the Reload server. So we have a lot of people using this integration. You don't have to use it, but we'll definitely cover that a little bit more in the Reload section. We don't ever delete anything from GroupWise. You're going to have to run your own reduces and expires based on your policy. And then, of course, stubbing is something that is new in GroupWise 8. And that is a whole different conversation when it comes to stubbing. If anyone ever wants to talk about the stubbing API, we'd love to do that. We support it. I mean, you can stub your email, but there's definitely a lot more to it. It's a big presentation. We could spend the next hour talking about stubbing. If anyone ever wants to know more about that, just let me know. Okay, so here we go, Retain 2. So we're into the last couple of slides here on Retain before we switch over to Reload. We're on version 2.5 right now, so this is more of a change log. Support for the Amazon cloud. We're going to try and build more and more support for cloud-based technologies here moving into the future. The publishing client or your exporting client is just another way of making your data portable, where you go in, you find the information that you need, and you make it portable so that you can hand it off to somebody. The publishing client comes, fully indexed. It has an email viewer. You can forward messages from it. You can additionally export them off to PST or to PDF files. So you have multiple publishing and multiple export type of options, and those just come with Retain, so they're not additional products. We have 2 indexing engines, so this is where I don't want it to get too confusing, but we do have 2 indexing engines, and it's really a choice, and it really depends on the size of your organization, how many post offices you have, how much data you have, and then what is your retention period. So we have Lucene, which comes built into the Retain server, and that is something that is open source. There's no additional cost for it. It's just there. There's nothing to configure. There's nothing to install. That's just part of the install of the Retain server. And that can scale up to 2 billion documents. So when we look at an email, we've got the message body, we've got attachments, we've got the headers. So all of these things, the routing properties, get stored as documents, so Lucene can scale up to 2 billion. And then we have XLead, which requires a dedicated server, and this is really more of a, a heavy-lifting, high-performance indexing engine that can scale into the tens of billions of documents, but it does require dedicated hardware. So that is something that we pretty much look at, what the indexing engine to use. Most of our customers, of course, are using just the Lucene out of the box. But we do have some of the bigger organizations running on XLead. We've got Litigation Hold, whether it's per mailbox or per individual email message. Support for both GroupWise and Exchange. And then moving forward here, we're working on this right now. We're integrating all kinds of different technologies, all these different collaborative technologies, especially, this is driven 100% by demand from our customers. They're using Facebook, they're using Twitter, they're using all the different search engines, YouTubes, and so on within the enterprise, and they want to be able to control this. It's what we always talk about. It's not just kind of the cliche, but it's, you want to enable these things. You want to enable these emerging technologies, and you want to, give these tools to your end users, or they're just going to go do it on their smartphones, or they're going to do it on some other type of device, a tablet, whatever. So if you enable it, well, then obviously you can control it, just like you do with email. So we really are starting to see you know, the heavy usage of Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and all the different search engines, instant messaging clients, and of course these are now starting to fall under the you know, management of electronic records. So we're going to have support for that in 2011. That's being worked on right now. We're taking our Retain for BlackBerry Enterprise Server. That is a separate product right now. That is where we're capturing the PIN, SMS, BlackBerry Messenger type data, storing it, making it discoverable, and we're bringing that into the Retain kind of umbrella of this all under one product. And then moving forward with Retain version 3, clustering high availability so that we can have these, you know, larger maybe types of organizations where we see the, you know, 50, 60, 70,000 user types of environments that need, you know, multiple servers, redundancy, high availability, and so on. Okay,
Taylor,
so yes.
We did have a quick question come through. Somebody was asking if you could explain the delete process a little bit more in detail.
For sure. Okay, so I can answer that one quickly, and then we can swing back to it later if we have to. So the deletion process, so how that works. So, you know, typically when you set up your policies, you're going to assign or affix an end date. So if it's 5 years from now, you know, whatever that is, 1,800 days or whatever, you're going to say, okay, we're going to put a 5-year retention policy on whether it's this post office, this distribution, this one individual user, you know, whatever the scenario is. So then basically how that works is that you have something called the Deletion Manager. And if you want to go in and see how this works, on the bottom of this slide here, the more information slide, demo.guava.com, you can actually go into the Retain demo server and take a look at this yourself. But the Deletion Manager, how it works is it's a schedule type of routine. So you've put basically a lifeline on your email or on your policies. We'll say 5 years. Well, then you go in, and I don't want to confuse things, but there's multiple dates that you can use. There's creation dates, there's archive dates, and there's different dates that you can use. So it really depends on what makes most sense. Do you want to go by the GroupWise creation date? Do you want to go by the Retain archive date? And then what you do is you run the Deletion Manager. And the Deletion Manager, what it is just kind of a scheduled job. I would say that most companies or most customers run it every, say, 14 to 30 days, so maybe every 2 weeks or maybe once a month. We have some companies that are running this every day, so it really depends on what your needs are. And then basically you're going to look for any messages that are over X days old or X years old, and then the Deletion Manager is going to go in, it's going to discover what messages are available to be deleted, and then it's going to go ahead and delete them. And then, of course, what ties into that is the Litigation Hold, where if you do need to put a hold on a particular mailbox or on individual mail messages, well, then obviously even if those messages are eligible for deletion, they are not going to be deleted until that hold has been removed. So just think of it as kind of a maintenance job that runs every, you know, X amount of days. It goes through, it looks for messages that fit your criteria for deletion, and then, of course, you have to have the right or the ACL to be able to apply that deletion or the litigation hold type of responsibility within the interface. So that's all there. And then if you have any further questions on that, you know, jump in anytime, or, you know, we can pick it up in the last couple of minutes. Okay, so on the web, there's my email again, tc@guava.com. Phone number, all of this stuff is always provided afterwards, and then demo.guava.com for the demo server. And we're going to switch over to Reload as we have about 25 minutes left. And hopefully that answered your question, but we can swing back to that a little bit later if you want to know more. So I know we're plowing through this. It's a lot of stuff in a short period of time. We're going to jump into Reload. Reload is really it's a really interesting product. It's something that we've had a lot of success with it. I would say, and I always say this, it's largely in part to the lead developer here, Tay Kratzer. So, you know, it's one of these things where it's a really different type of experience for me managing the products and the development group here at Guava, but also, you know, as a company, when we come out with different solutions, you know, for the GroupWise market, Reload is really a unique product. And the reason for that is Tay, you know, worked for Novell for so many years, has a really intimate knowledge of the GroupWise message store, and was really, really familiar with all of the pains and the challenges backing up, GroupWise and getting a complete, consistent backup with 100% of the messages, and then making it accessible and making it something that is, disaster-proof. And that's really what Tay has done. It's just incredibly simple to use, which is probably the coolest thing. And I'll even relate, how we use Reload here at Guava. I get into the backup server all the time. I use it. I have a limit on my mailbox, so I have to delete messages and attachments all the time, and then I can just pop into Reload anytime that I need to and restore messages. And if we ever have a disaster, well, then I know we just, click a button and we can bring Reload back up, and we can, eliminate downtime, and it's just really a slick product. So in terms of what it is, it's a hot backup. It's a disaster recovery solution. I'm going to, go a little bit deeper in terms of how it actually works. That's probably what's more interesting. You have instant access to your backed up data, and that's basically a feature. It's called auto reload. You can use it. You don't have to use it. Here at the Guava, we do use it, and basically, as soon as that backup is completed, I can connect with my GroupWise client to the Reload backup server, and I have access to the most recent backup. What we see is, in most cases, is that when end users delete something, by accident and they need something recovered, it's usually within the first 24 to 48 hours. It's pretty rare that someone deletes something, 2 months ago and then just suddenly remembers, oh yeah, I deleted something 2 months ago. Can you go back and find it for me? So I would say where that's leading is that most customers, most Reload users keep anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks of data hot and live on the Reload system, and then after that you're going to decide, do you want to put it on tape? Do you want to go to a long-term disk, or do you want to just delete it? So we'll kind of get into the nuts and bolts of how that actually works and the technology behind it. You can have GroupWise on any platform, so GroupWise on network, GroupWise on Linux, GroupWise on Windows, and you're going to be able to back it up with Reload. Reload only runs on Linux, and of course, whenever we talk about Linux, we're talking about Novell Linux, so SLES or OES, and 99% of the time you're just going to go with SLES. You don't have to have any type of integration with the eDirectory. You don't have to have any type of integration into your existing tree or your existing system. Reload is sitting off to the side all by itself. It's not sending and receiving email until you tell it to, which would be more, of the disaster recovery type of scenario. We have literally had dozens and dozens and dozens of customers that have had disasters, whether it's a site disaster, whether it's a server disaster, whether it's, so many different things that can happen. Reload has been used. We've got tons of success stories up on the website, and it's really, truly, one-click disaster recovery. You have to set it up, obviously, but you also have to test it, and you have to go through these processes. And we recommend that you don't just put in your DR solution, once a year, once every 6 months, whatever it is, however you run your training or whatever. Go through the process of simulating a disaster. Be ready. Be ready to expect what's going to happen when that happens. And I'll give kind of an overview as we move along here of how that works. But in most cases, GroupWise is down for whatever reason. You click on the DR button in the Reload interface. Everything loads up on the Reload server, and basically your end users can connect to the Reload server and continue to work and send and receive email, and you have virtually no downtime. So I'll give a couple of quick anecdotes on that as we go along. Really different from Retain or any archiving solution for that matter. When it comes to the format of the actual data that gets stored. Reload keeps everything in GroupWise format, so the security, the integrity, the encryption is all maintained. On Reload, you cannot just go in and read anybody's email, just like you can't in GroupWise. You need some type of a trusted app or something to break the encryption of GroupWise. Whereas Retain and obviously other archiving systems convert messages out of GroupWise format, which is why you have those discovery tools that let you search across all mailboxes, for example. Our backup speeds, lightning fast. GroupWise on network, we can do 30 gigs in 10 minutes. GroupWise on Linux, we can do 60 gigs in 10 minutes. We're on Reload 3.1 right now and moving forward to 3.5. We're putting in a few more speed enhancements. So it just keeps getting faster and faster. We have a couple of really good benchmark customers right now. I think I don't have it in the slide deck, but they have 2 800-gig post offices, one customer, and we're backing those up in an hour and a half every night. And I'll kind of touch on how that works because it's a little bit different than a standard type of snapshot or tape technology. Nothing ever gets installed on the GroupWise server. Nothing gets installed on your end user's clients. Okay, so we've switched over to the design phase, the design slide. Now, this is a really simple setup here. We have one GroupWise post office, we've got one reload server, and we've got, a terminal or a workstation that's connecting to either. So, this is a simple one server environment, obviously. We typically would like you to have a second reload box off-site. It doesn't cost you anything except for the actual machine itself. It's not going to cost you on your licenses. Some companies obviously don't have a second location or a satellite office or whatever. So, we recommend that maybe, you can put these off-site boxes maybe on a separate floor in your office, or some type of a friendly type of company that you could use for something offsite. It doesn't really make sense to have your main reload server and your backup reload server in the same office, obviously. So in this particular case, you've got GroupWise running on the left, you've got a reload server installed, and we're just scheduling our backup jobs. And basically what happens is it's very much like Retain, where the first backup that we take is 100% the size of the post office. So you've got a 500 gig post office. We're going in with our first job, and we're backing up all 500 gigs. That first backup that we do with reload is always going to remain on the backup server. It's always going to be on reload, and we call that your master backup. And this is basically how we fit into this kind of cool little model that we have moving forward. So day one, we do 100% of the post office. Fine. We got all 500 gigs in there. Well, moving forward to day 2 and day 3 and day 4 and day 5 and so on, we're only taking 12% the size of the post office for every subsequent backup. And the way that we do that is we're taking a true delta, or a true incremental backup, from the master backup to day 2, from day 2 to day 3, from day 3 to day 4. What is new? And that is, once again, based on it's based on the Smart Purge flag. So, of course, we're enabling the purge flag here on the GroupWise server, and that means that end users cannot delete anything until we've made a copy of it. And that's, once again, works just like the retention services for archiving solutions. So we take that master backup, we get 100% of the post office in on day 1, and then moving forward, we're just taking about 12, maybe 12.5% the size of the post office for every backup after that. And at the end of the week, you're looking at maybe 185% the size of the post office. Very smaller, very much smaller when we look at some type of a snapshot type of technology. And then what you do is you basically, break these down into 1 week chunks, so that you say, I'm going to keep, 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks of hot live data on reload. When it comes to planning out your storage needs, planning out the reload server, for example, it really depends on, number one, how many post offices do you have, how big are they, and how long do you want to keep this hot live data on reload. The formula is 2.5 times the size of the post office for 1 week of hot live data. And the reason why it's 2.5 times is that master backup is always in there, and then we're taking those 12% dailies, which is about 185% the size of the post office, and then because we've enabled Smart Purge, we're factoring in a little bit of wiggle room here, because your post offices, basically will grow. Most people aren't using these anti-deletion technologies on their own. So, I think Novell, the last I heard, they give us an industry average of maybe 30–35% growth on post offices per year. We've seen in some cases where Smart Purge is enabled and the post offices grow between 50 and 70% per year. So, it varies per organization. We tend to go for maybe 35–40% growth per year, and then we can plan out the capacity moving forward. So, we get everything scheduled, we're hitting the post offices, we're backing up everything to reload, and then once it's in reload, it's instantly accessible by your GroupWise client. So down at the bottom, your GroupWise client can either go directly to GroupWise, or you can connect directly over to reload, get the messages, get the attachment, restore them back into GroupWise if you need to, and you can just do it basically with a few mouse clicks, where you take the messages and you actually restore them back into the GroupWise post office, and it is a true restoration because the messages are kept in GroupWise format on the reload server. Now, when you spec out a reload server, how do you plan out the hardware? Well, it really depends on whether or not this is going to be just a, local backup server that, end users can connect to and restore messages, or is it going to be a full DR box? So the difference would be if it's just a local, backup server, it's there to do restorations and so on. You don't need to go out and buy a big fancy server. You can, we have some people running, reload on workstations. I mean, you can do it in some cheaper kind of surplus hardware. But if you are going to, or if you're anticipating using reload in the event of a disaster, then we suggest, of course, that you make your reload box comparable to that of your GroupWise server or your post office server so that it can handle X amount of client connections. I mean, it only makes sense. We've had some people, fail over 1,000-user post offices, maybe 80, 90 gigs, 100 gigs on a workstation. It works, but it's slow. So you want to make sure that your DR box, of course, is able to handle it. Okay, so we've switched over to the hot backup slide. So just a few additional points here. We'll talk about some different types of deployment scenarios. So Smart Purge, of course, we want to make sure that this backup is 100% complete and consistent. And the idea behind that is if you're going to go back and try and find something, you want to make sure that it's there. I mean, if you're not using a backup technology that integrates with Smart Purge, well, then end users can delete email. So what's the point? If you're not going to get 100% of the email, well, then why would you even bother restoring something from tape or, the traditional way of going back and trying to find something from 2 months ago? If you're not using Smart Purge, then you're not getting 100% of your email. You can't delete anything from reload either, obviously. What good would it be if end users can go in and delete stuff from the backup server? We talked a little bit about the backup speeds. We're only taking, roughly 12% of the post office on a daily basis, and that represents a full backup. So every backup every day is only 12%, but it's a full backup. It's no smoke and mirrors. It's nothing fancy behind the scenes. We do a couple of little things, which is how we can get that 12%, but everything on the reload server is GroupWise data, and when you go in, it looks like a GroupWise post office. There's just 1 or 2 little places where we're working a little bit of magic, but it's nothing too crazy. And then if you actually need to take your reload backups and restore or whatever a completely lost GroupWise system, well, then that is there as well, where we can actually not only use reload as a disaster recovery spare tire type of GroupWise system, we can actually take all of that data and put it right back into GroupWise if we have to, and we've built in a migration utility that can do that. Okay, so use your GroupWise client to access the data. Going to just kind of go through this quickly since we're into about 13 minutes to go. So I'll try and leave 5 minutes here for Q&A, and then anything beyond that we can pick up offline, I guess. Restore any type of message items. Of course, reload gets used to restore entire users. Address books, the process for address books is you go into reload, you export the address book, you go back into GroupWise, you import the address book. Pretty simple. Nothing gets installed on the server or the clients. Doesn't matter what platform GroupWise is running on. There's nothing to go in and do other than, hit the failover button or hit the disaster recovery button. Of course, you've gone through, you've set it up, you've tested it, you know that it's working, and if in the event that you lose your GroupWise server, you just click on the button. Reload now becomes a spare tire type of GroupWise system. Behind the scenes, typically you're going to use DNS, so instead of the end users plugging in a new IP or host name, you've changed the IP of your GroupWise system to the reload server. The end users, if you've had a disaster, the end users have probably been booted out of GroupWise, and when you tell them in 5 minutes or in 10 minutes that they can reconnect, well, behind the scenes, they're not connecting to GroupWise, they're connecting to reload. They have no idea. It's the same experience, and then after you've, repaired your GroupWise system or, fixed your hardware or whatever, well, then you just use that migration utility to migrate that data from reload back into GroupWise. And there's a couple of different reasons why you do that. One is after or post-disaster, and then in other cases we have people, of course, that are migrating from network to Linux. That's really the big one these days. And you can use reload to migrate your system. So all of these things are heavily documented. We've done it dozens of times. So if anyone wants to see some of these migration documents or so on, we're happy to share that with you. In terms of the DR box, we love to have it off-site, but of course, if you don't have that ability, then maybe on a different floor of your office building or with a partner or, someone, a Guava partner that does these types of services for you. The nice thing is that it's tested and proven. You know that you're going to be ready if you have a disaster. So you can test this. If you need to run a little 30-minute test on the weekend or something, you know the process, you know how it works. Maybe involve a couple of end users just to kind of get their experience as well, and just make sure that everybody is on board and ready. If the GroupWise system goes down for whatever reason, maintenance, site, server types of disasters, it really could be anything. Virtually no downtime. I mean, we've had some customers with dozens and dozens of servers. multiple terabytes of data, lose their entire SAN, for example, and they've had to fail over to reload. And you know what? Within maybe 15, 20 minutes, they've had all 20-something post offices back up and running, and you have 20, 25 minutes of downtime. So that's really the goal of what we're talking about here. You don't have to restore from tape. You don't have to sacrifice productivity of your end users, and of course that migration utility that I talked about is there, whether it's post-disaster or if you're migrating to a new platform. Okay, so these are some of the cool things you can do here with Reload as well. You can do intraday backup. So we've had a few customers that have lost their entire GroupWise system, and we're talking about some huge honking GroupWise systems where they've lost data, they've lost email, they've had a disaster, they've lost their storage, they've lost their server, whatever the case may be, and they've had to basically bite the bullet and lose email. So that's never a good thing. So what you want to try and do is you want to maybe minimize that window between the last successful backup and the next successful backup. So here at Guava, at the post office we have here in Montreal, we do our backups every hour. Our post office is pretty tiny. It's maybe 40, 50 gigs now, but we run a backup job every hour, and that way we know if we have a disaster, we're as good as 1 hour ago. Chicago law firm, they basically had one of these types of disasters. They'll remain nameless, but they basically had they lost their SAN. So once you get burned once, you maybe change the way that you run your backup procedures. They're backing up every 2 hours between 6 and 10, and that way if they do have some type of a disaster into the future, they can basically be as good as up to 2 hours ago. Concurrent backup, so you can run 5 backup jobs at the same time, 5 post offices. We have the state of Utah that uses Reload quite heavily. They have 7 post offices ranging from, these days between 50 and 400, 500 gigs, and of those 7 post offices, they're running 3 backup jobs at the same time, and they're doing that in just over 2 hours. I'd also mention that that Chicago law firm that has 2 800-gig post offices, their nightly 12% backups are taking an hour and a half to get that all done. So just really fast, really efficient. You separate everything off into these 1 week type of chunks, and then you basically decide if you want to go to tape. If you do want to integrate with your existing tape system, we take these 1 week chunks of email and we can tarball them or compress them into one flat tar file, and then you basically take that one tar file and you commit that to tape. So as opposed to committing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of individual small files, you're just committing one flat file. And then if you need to ever restore that in 6 months, well, then you just bring back that tar file, decompress it on any reload accessible mounted drive or reload server, and then you have access to it. It's GroupWise data. You just run a reload post office against that backup. Okay, so we're running into 7 minutes here, so I'll just touch on a few things. So we've wrapped up Reload 3.1. We're now working on Reload 3.5. That's going to be out here in 2011. Tay's been working on this the last several months. I won't confuse things too much, but we do have 2 interfaces with Reload. We have a text-based menu system that you can use directly on the Linux server, and we have a web-based interface. If you go out to demo.guava.com, you can see the web interface, and we're basically getting to a point where we have full feature parity between the text-based system and the web-based interface. And really the big difference is the profiles. And the profile in Reload is very much like a profile in Retain, and basically it's going to represent the post office, and you can run up to 20 of these profiles or 20 post offices to be backed up on one Reload server. And we do both the GroupWise post office and the GroupWise domains so that you have the ability to back up 20 POs per Reload server. And then once again, how you plan out your hardware is going to be based on how many POs you have, how big they are, and how much disk space do you have available that you want to store the stuff for X amount of weeks. So that's basically how that works. Compatibilities with all the recent versions of GroupWise as we work closely with Novell with these things. What you're going to notice here is that a lot of these things on the Reload 3.1 slide is that we're really just wrapping a lot of services around Reload. I mean, the core functionality of Reload, backing up 100% of your data, making it immediately accessible, and the disaster recovery components, those are the big things that it does. Those are really mature and they work great. So now we just wrap all these services around, email notifications, monitoring pages, intelligent job queues, recovery from any types of errors, just ease of use, more documentation. I mean, that's really the nicest thing is that, Tay works with customers all the time, and based on their feedback, based on support cases, that's kind of how we measure the success of the product. So at any given time, I can say, we have probably less than 5 support calls on reload. So really just a solid product, and then we just build all of these features around the core of the product. Probably the most significant point here on the final version of 3.1 is the migration feature. So the migration feature quickly is also, it's not just, post-disaster when you need to put GroupWise mail back into GroupWise, but we do have a lot of customers going from NetWare to Linux these days, so that you can also use that migration. So, we added 5 threads to that, so it's 5 times faster than it used to be, and that's really the big thing. So that's it for Reload. I know we've got about 5 minutes left. I want to thank everybody once again. We can go ahead and take some questions. And the one thing I just wanted to point out, which I always do, hopefully everyone can see this, for anyone who's a die-hard NetWare fan out there, you're not into Linux yet. I got into Linux maybe 3-4 years ago, but when I first did it, I used this course that Novell has up on their website. It's kind of hard to find. Sometimes they move the link around. So if you want this URL, send me an email, tc@guava.com, tango-charlie@guava.com. And what it is it's kind of a way of bridging, all of your NetWare skills over to Novell Linux. I found this extremely useful. There's a little self-assessment test at the bottom, and it basically just takes you through all of the different things that you manage and troubleshoot and maintain on a NetWare system, and all of the comparable tools and techniques and strategies and things that you can do on an OES Linux system. So all the little modules are down here. You've got the Novell engineers that go through. You watch the videos, you listen, and then at the bottom you have a little self-assessment test. So if anyone wants that, it's kind of hard to find, but it's down in their training, free learning courses, whatever. And, of course, if you want that URL, shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to send it to you. So with that being said, I think we have maybe 3 to 5 minutes for questions. I know I went a little bit late. Thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate your time today, and I hope everyone has a good weekend coming up here.